You're listening to the Touch 'em Up podcast. I'm your host, Double M, and on today's episode, we have UFC Vegas 88, Tuivasa versus Tybura, which takes place this Saturday from the UFC Apex, March 16th, 2024 at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, with a heavyweight main event bout between top 10 ranked contenders in Ty Bam Bam Tuivasa taking on the number 10 ranked Marcin Tybura. And in the co-main event, you have a banger at 170 pounds between a former Ultimate Fighter winner in Brian Pooh Bear Battle taking on elusive and powerful striker Ange Loosa. So without any further ado, let's get this started and step into the ring. All right, guys. All right. I think I'm going to do a separate video to recap 299. Just because I feel like there's a lot of stuff we have to talk about, and based off of how a lot of the fights went, predictions were pretty on point for most fights. I think we went like 11 out of 14 or something like that. Pretty good night of predictions. Not the best betting night, but sometimes you just got to stick to the money lines, and we'll leave it at that. But we're just going to get right into the card. I'm not going to break down every fight. I want to get this breakdown out early. I'll probably type notes in the comment section for the fights that I don't break down, but we are going to kick it off with the first fight. So let's get this started for UFC Vegas 88, Tuivasa versus Tybura. All right, the first fight we're going to break down is a battle in the, I believe it's the lightweight division, featherweight division. Okay, so we're a little off at 145 pounds between Josh Culibao, who comes in with a record of 11-2, and Danny Silva on the other side, who I believe has a record of 8 victories with 1 loss. I think that this fight is actually a lot more competitive than people are giving credit to one side. A lot of people are riding with Culibao because of the UFC experience, because of the forward pressure, because of his ability to wrestle. The boxing ability of Culibao, and I understand, and he definitely has a higher level of UFC experience, which is usually a big, telling point, or a big, I guess, it's a big showcase in fights against newcomers. And when you look at a lot of fighters off the Contender Series, a lot of them don't seem to live up to the hype. I mean, Tom Nolan is one example. There's a couple other really big examples that have flopped as Contender Series fighters in the UFC when they make their way over to the big stage. But Danny Silva, I feel like, is a little bit different. I think this fight between Culibao and Silva is going to be a war. I think it's going to be a firefight. And I think that when it's two fighters who are going to be coming forward, two fighters who are going to get in each other's faces, two fighters who are going to kind of, stand in the middle and slug it out, I side with the fighter who I've seen go through a war for 15 minutes straight and, incorporate takedowns to seal up rounds, land good shots up top into the body, and just have a really solid cardio pace for 15 minutes. And that fighter's Danny Silva. I think his nickname is Puma. I'm going with Danny Silva here against Culibao. Culibao does have the higher level of UFC experience. Culibao, had a pretty competitive fight with Lerone Murphy, but I think that this is just a different stylistic matchup. I think the holes in the defense of Culibao on the feet are going to be exposed by a fighter like Silva, who can throw multi-shot combinations. The biggest thing I like from Danny Silva is his body work. I love his lead hooks to the body, his rear hooks to the body. He'll throw that hook to the body kind of like a shovel hook and follow up with the backhand. And he's very, very solid when he starts putting things together. And it's not like he can only do well when he's the one in control. He had the fight against Angel Pacheco, who I think also got signed to the UFC, one of the best Contender Series fights we've seen. And it was a back and forth war, pretty much a boxing match. But the fighter I saw incorporate more weapons, Danny Silva. The fighter I saw who used better wrestling, Danny Silva. And I like Danny Silva in this matchup. I think that Culibao can use his wrestling. Culibao might be able to push Silva up against the cage, maybe win minutes due to control time, pushing Silva up against the cage and getting takedowns. But I think in a pure striking matchup, I think the cleaner striker and the fighter who has more output over 15 minutes and can keep a high pace is Danny Silva. I like Danny Silva here. I know he's off the Contender Series. I know he's coming into the UFC on a UFC debut. He trains alongside Cub Swanson, Dan Argueta. Argueta didn't have the best run in the UFC, but I don't really take that too much to heart because I think Silva is a much more well-rounded fighter than Argueta has kind of ever been. And that's not a knock on Argueta as a fighter. He's good at what he does. But the more well-rounded fighter is Danny Silva, and the fighter who's more comfortable on the feet, where every fight starts out, is Danny Silva. I think Culibao has a lot of power. I think Silva can match it. I think Silva can push a higher pace in the second and third round. And I see a late TKO for Danny Silva here against Josh Culibao. I know a lot of people are favoring that UFC experience, but stylistically, I think this is a good fight for the underdog in Silva, who I think is plus 160 right now as an underdog. So give me the plus 160 underdog, the UFC debutant, in Danny El Puma or La Puma Silva to defeat Joshua Culibao via just a late third round TKO, pouring on the pressure, getting in his face, and winning the war. So Danny Silva, third round TKO. All right, the next fight up is in the flyweight division between Jafel Filo taking on Ode Osborne. I think this is going to be a competitive fight, but the one fighter I think is clearly better overall is Jafel Filo. I think that he can match the striking of Ode Osborne on the feet. I think the biggest difference for Ode is his output on the feet. He puts a lot of combinations together. He moves well, switches stances, orthodox and southpaw, and kind of can just out-volume and outpace guys. And I think that could work for Ode going into the third round, and leading up to a decision. I do think that he can outpoint a guy like Filo, but I think the more dangerous fighter in this fight is Jafel Filo. It's not like he's just a jiu-jitsu guy. It's not like he's just a fighter who sits on the back foot and waits for fighters to take him down, or a fighter who can only get takedowns and can't really strike. He has striking. He has good output. His boxing is solid. I believe he got a really, really heavy knockout on the Contender Series. You can correct me in the comment section if I'm wrong, but he can mix up the striking. He's pretty technical when he puts his strikes together, and he has really solid jiu-jitsu, almost catching Muhammad Mokaev in a knee bar. And, Mokaev doesn't really have a lot of moments of adversity, even though the fight with Alex Perez was a lot closer than I think people were expecting it to be. I think Ode is going to have the higher output, the higher volume, but he fights so close with most fighters. I would almost guarantee you that if there isn't a finish, this fight probably ends with a split decision. Because, look at Ode Osborne and Charles Johnson. It was a split decision. I think it might have been a unanimous decision, actually. But he fights so close because he's not a power guy. He's not a big, heavy punch guy, not a big knockdown guy. He's a volume guy. And with volume fighters, if the other fighter lands bigger shots, gets takedowns, pushes up, and cage controls, it makes the fights very competitive and very close. And Ode Osborne, I think, can get his wrestling off against Filo, but I think the jiu-jitsu is going to be too much, so he might want to stay away from that. And I think he's going to want to keep it a striking matchup. And I think Filo is more than capable of competing with a guy like Ode Osborne on the feet. And if the striking doesn't go well for Ode and he feels uncomfortable and he goes to start to wrestle, I do think he can get the takedowns, but I think he's going to be put in a lot of danger with submission attempts from a guy like Filo. So like I said, I think the more dangerous fighter is Filo, but the higher output, the better pace, the higher volume is Ode Osborne. I think if Osborne wins, it's just kind of slowing down and breaking a fighter like Filo and winning via a third round finish or winning by decision. But I don't think a guy like Ode is going to break a fighter like Filo. And the more dangerous fighter is going to be Jafel in this matchup. So I like Jafel Filo to be able to outstrike Ode Osborne on the feet, land the more impactful shots, not so much the higher numbers. And he definitely has knockout power as well, and we've seen Ode Osborne get knocked out by the likes of Manel Kape and Tyson Nam. So I think Filo's even live for a knockout here. Really solid left hook, mixes up his boxing well. I could see him catching Ode with a left hook and knocking him out, but I'm going to go with a drop and a submission, a club and sub for Jafel Filo. I'm going to go with a second round club and sub rear naked choke submission for Jafel Filo against Ode Osborne. I think he's more dangerous. I think he's more well-rounded, and I think the finishing upside is on the side of Filo in this fight. So give me Jafel Filo, second round, club and sub, rear naked choke against Ode Osborne. Not a fight I would bet on, though. I think it could go either way, and it could just be a really close fight where you're kind of biting your nails depending on who gets the decision if it goes all three. So I don't like the bet, but I like Filo from a pick side by submission. All right, the next fight up, and the fight I'm the most excited to talk about, is going to come to you in the 145-pound featherweight division between Christian C-Rod Rodriguez, who comes in with a record of 10 victories and 1 loss, taking on Isaac Dolgarian, the Midwest Choppa, making his second appearance inside the UFC after a first-round TKO in his debut against Francis the Fire Marshall. I think that Rodriguez versus Dolgarian is clearly the best fight on the card. I think it's the most competitive fight on the card on paper, but I don't necessarily think it's going to play out super competitive inside the octagon. Rodriguez is the better striker overall. He has the higher level of UFC experience, UFC experience being the key word. But we've seen him have trouble with heavy grapplers, heavy wrestlers, and we've seen him get controlled and outpositioned in certain fights. I know he won the fight against Raul Rosas Jr., was able to survive the submission attempts, was able to survive getting his back taken, and then just kind of slowed down Rosas and win the second and the third round because he didn't have the cardio to push the pace. I think with Isaac Dolgarian, he has a lot of first-round finishes. I think all 6 of his wins came inside the first 2 or 3 minutes of his fights. All first-round finishes. This guy is a very decorated wrestler, and I think that's the biggest difference here. Rodriguez can wrestle. Rodriguez is the better striker. I think he can put combinations together better, mix his strikes up, use elbows, use knees, punctuate his combinations with kicks. But he's a very forward, pressure-heavy fighter, and I think that plays right into the game of a fighter like Dolgarian. I think Dolgarian's offensive wrestling and the ability to control from the top, his pressure, his shoulder pressure, his ability to pass the guard, going into half guard, going into mount, going into side control, and the ability to just rain down ground and pound and either finish a fighter with ground and pound punches or allow them to kind of surrender and give up a position where he can lock up a submission. I think Dolgarian is the side in this fight. I think if you're on the side of Christian Rodriguez, you're more banking on the fact of Dolgarian getting tired by pushing too hard in the first round, round and a half, slowing down and not being able to get a finish and kind of breaking down the stretch. And I think that there is some valid arguments in, some valid points in that argument. I think that Rodriguez is going to be the fighter who probably can push a higher pace in the second round, in the third round, because we haven't seen Dolgarian go that far. But just because we haven't seen it doesn't mean that he's not capable of going that far. And this guy's a national champion wrestler. I think he actually got to the nationals in high school, which is pretty unheard of, and ended up losing by a DQ or something. I saw something about a DQ, which shouldn't have been a DQ, but very high-level wrestling. Even the takedown he got against Francis Marshall, if you go back and look at it, it wasn't even a fully executed shot. He kind of was reaching for it and just grabbed him and cut the corner. And the minute that fight got on the ground, it was 100% Isaac Dolgarian, 0% Francis Marshall. And I really think Dolgarian, I'm not sure he can compete in terms of the volume on the feet against Rodriguez, but training out of Factory X, I'm sure he has good striking. I'm sure he knows how to put his combinations together, but we don't really see it because he doesn't really have to use it. And I think he will be able to get takedowns against a fighter like Christian Rodriguez in this fight. Because I think that Rodriguez, even though he has the higher experience, I'm not sure he can stop that wrestling for as long as he needs to in order to win this fight. You look at the grappling, he has a 70% takedown defense rate. Dolgarian, 100% takedown accuracy because he only needed 1 takedown in his first fight to finish it off. And Marshall's not a clown. Like, he's not a can. He's not a fighter who's not good. I mean, this guy knows how to put, the pace on fighters. Got a vicious knockout against Marcelo Rojo. And, I mean, that was a very impressive win because he didn't just win. He finished him and dominated him in the first round without even breaking a sweat. Busted him up with ground and pound elbows and hammer fists. And I think Rodriguez wins down the stretch, but I don't think we get that far. I think Dolgarian's going to be able to push forward. I think he's going to be able to use his wrestling. I think he's going to control from the top, not allowing Rodriguez to work his way back up to the feet and get it off at striking range like he's going to want to. And I think Dolgarian, gets the takedown and gets control time in round 1, but I think in round 2 it's more of the same, and I think he breaks Christian Rodriguez in round 2 and gets a ground and pound TKO. I could see it going to decision, but I just think this guy's wrestling is too high level for a fighter in Rodriguez. I think he's going to get that takedown in round 1. I think it's not going to come off the first takedown attempt, but I think he gets the takedown, lands some good ground and pound, gets control, clearly wins the round, but Rodriguez survives. And then going into round 2, I think Dolgarian catches Rodriguez coming in because he's probably going to want to push forward and pressure Dolgarian to draw out a shot, but I think he's not going to see the shot coming. He's going to get taken down again, controlled from the top, half guard, side control. He works to the full mount, lands elbows and hammer fists, flattens him out, and gets a ground and pound TKO in round 2. I'm going with the undefeated professional in the Midwest Choppa, Isaac Dolgarian. to defeat Christian C-Rod Rodriguez via a second-round ground-and-pound TKO, going 2-0 with 2 back-to-back finishes in his UFC career. I think this Dulgarian kid is for real. I think his wrestling is extremely high level, and I think we're going to see a showcase for Dulgarian in this spot. So my pick is Isaac Dulgarian, second-round ground-and-pound TKO against Christian Rodriguez. Up next, you have a battle in the lightweight division between Natan Levy taking on Mike Beast Boy Davis. As all of you know, I did interview Mike Davis on my podcast. There's a video. I'll put a link to that video in the description of these predictions and this breakdown. Interviewed him about a year back. Really solid conversation, really solid interview. And, I don't want bias to come into this prediction because I am going to be picking Mike Davis to beat Natan Levy. But I think he's just better everywhere than Natan Levy. The one thing I will say about Levy is he has very solid power. He puts his boxing combinations together well. He has decent combinations off the back foot. The counter uppercut to the hook, the counter hook to the straight. Very good counter right hook being a southpaw. And against the orthodox fighter in Davis, he's going to want to get that outside foot to line up the straight left hand and then the counter right hook or the check hook if he's trying to pivot off. I think Natan Levy is going to be the better kicker in terms of finishing a fight with kicks, but I don't necessarily think he's the better kicker from a technical perspective. I just think his kicks are a little more dangerous in the way that the fight's going to play out. I give the cardio advantage to Mike Davis, even though he does slow down later in the fights. He's a big, muscular guy. He will slow down, going into the second, going into the third, but he can still find a way to push the pace. I think he can out-grapple Natan Levy, and I've seen Natan Levy break in a third round against Mike Breeden. Now, I know Mike Breeden came back and got that third round TKO over Anshul Jubli. I believe that was his name. And but breaking against Mike Breeden, considering how highly regarded you are as a prospect, even though you're not a prospect anymore, I think Natan Levy is kind of going to get fraud checked here against the Beast Boy. I think Davis can compete on the feet with Levy. I think he can throw combinations, have good counters. I think he can really have a lot of success offensively wrestling in this fight. I think he can take down Levy. I think he can control Levy. I think he's going to be the stronger fighter in the clinch. I think he's going to have the better ground control time. We saw against Vyacheslav Borshev, he has good ground and pound, good elbows, good hammer fists, good ground control as well. Not even just striking, just controlling the opponent when they hit the mat. He can, change his positioning, flow really well. He has a really good flow. The only thing is he's been gone for a little over a year, I believe. And, that's the only thing I'm worried about is the layoff. But Natan Levy, I feel like if he lands a good head kick from the southpaw positioning, or he lands a good body kick and kind of folds Davis, that's kind of the only way I see him winning is with a big head kick or a big body kick that hurts Davis and kind of puts him away. But I think the higher volume, the more impactful strikes, the better wrestler, the person with the better cardio over 15 minutes, I think that's Mike Davis, man. I think he's going to push a pace on this kid in Levy and break him in the midpoint of the second and then into the third round. And it probably goes to decision, but I could see a late TKO finish because technically Mike Breeden should have been able to get Natan Levy out of there in the third round, but Levy hung on, came back, landed some big counters, hurt Mike Breeden. But I don't think Mike Davis is going to be as wild if he gets Natan Levy hurt and backs him up. This guy's a really solid striker, won the Tiger Muay Thai tryouts back in the day, and the guy knows how to put combinations together on the feet. He knows how to punctuate his combinations with kicks. He knows how to use his wrestling offensively. He's got good ground and pound. He's just a much more well-rounded fighter than I think Levy is, and kind of that I think than Levy ever really will be in his UFC career because he hasn't really had an impressive performance yet in his UFC career, and I think Davis is going to kind of put it on Natan Levy here. I like Mike Davis to get the job done. I think he finishes with a third-round TKO. I think he will slow down Levy, hurt him. I think he'll be tired as well because he is a big, muscular dude for this division, very big for 155. But I think he'll be able to break him with the forward pressure, with the takedowns, with the cage control, with the boxing combinations. This guy trained under Customato. He doesn't only have good kickboxing, he has good boxing. His hands are very crisp, very clean. But with that hands low style, kind of shoulder rolling and pivoting, I feel like the left head kick of Natan Levy could be there. So that is something you do have to worry about. But aside from that, I think this is the Beast Boy show all day. It's going to be a Beast Boy beatdown with Mike Davis defeating Natan Levy via a third round ground and pound TKO. I could see him catching him with a clean shot on the feet and knocking him out as well, but I think he breaks him down the stretch. I'm going to go Mike Beast Boy Davis to defeat Natan Levy via third round ground and pound TKO and racking up another win in the premier mixed martial arts organization. Next fight up's in the middleweight division between Gerald GM3 Mearshart taking on Brian Bam Bam Barberina, the second Bam Bam on the card aside from Tuivasa in the main event. And I think this is a very volatile matchup. I think either fighter can win, and I'll say why. We know that GM3 has a good left body kick and a decent straight left or overhand. He even dropped Bruno Silva with it, who went back and forth with the current light heavyweight champion and Alex Pereira. But we've seen that Silva's durability has gotten worse and worse in his MMA career, especially inside the UFC. And I think GM3 winning that fight is important, but you can't take too much stock from that fight. There's not a lot of fighters in this division that he's going to outstrike. He got knocked out by Joe Pyfer, got finished right away by Hamzat Chimaev, and both of those losses are not a bad thing, especially the Chimaev loss. But, GM3 doesn't really have a lot of durability. He gets hurt in almost every single one of his fights, but he's gotten a little bit more comfortable on the feet, and he can slug it out with some people and kind of come out on the right end of some exchanges at certain times. But I don't think standing on the feet with Brian Barberina is a good idea. I think Barberina can drop Gerald Mearshart, and even if he doesn't, he's got insane volume, insane output, and he can really put his combinations together well, mixing up the tempo, mixing up the levels between the head, between the body, punctuating it with kicks. But he's mainly a boxer, and I think if GM3 stands with this guy, you're basically asking for disaster if you're on the side of Mearshart. But at the same time, we've seen Barberina get taken down. We've seen him get out-grappled. We've seen him get put in bad positions on the ground by superior grapplers. And I think GM3 is the type of guy who can wind up in a top position and ground and pound him and look for a submission, or even just take him down and outright sub him, because we don't, Brian Barberina does not have a good ground game. So we're really banking on the fact of where is this fight going to take place. If it takes place on the feet, I think Barberina out-volumes him, outstrikes him, and eventually gets a TKO, because like I said, Mearshart is not the most durable guy. But if they get into close range, if they get into clinch range, if they get into an exchange where, Barberina slips up and Mearshart can take advantage and get top control, then on the ground, it's GM3's world. So you have to really weigh the options. Do you think the fight takes place on the feet for most of the fight? That's probably going to be a Brian Barberina win. Does the fight take place on the mat for the majority of the fight, however long it lasts? Then you're probably on the side of the much higher level grappler in Gerald Mearshart. In my opinion, I just have a little bit more faith in Barberina than I do GM3, but it's about 55-45 because, like I said, depending on what area the fight takes place, that's going to determine your winner. On the feet, Barberina wins. On the mat, Mearshart is able to get a submission or a ground and pound TKO. I just favor the durability of Barberina a little bit more, and I think he's going to be able to stay at the range he wants to and kind of pick apart Gerald Mearshart. I'm going to go with Brian Bam Bam Barberina. I think he wins this fight via a second round TKO. I think the volume kind of just picks apart GM3 in the first round. He shoots a couple takedowns but doesn't get it, but he's able to survive. And then in round two, the volume, the combinations, and everything he's able to put together on the feet is able to get GM3 out of there. The win over, The win over, I can't think of the guy's name. Ruthless Robbie Lawler was very impressive. Even though Lawler was damaged at that point, even though he was over the hill, the combinations and the fact that he was able to stop Robbie Lawler was very impressive. And even in the Mahmoud Muradov fight, even though he got rocked, even though he got dropped, he was still coming forward, putting the pressure on a guy who, yes, GM3 also defeated, but it wasn't due to the success in the striking. It was due to the ability of him to slow down Muradov and eventually just take him down and get that sub. So I'm going to bank on the fact that Barberina is able to keep it on the feet, and even if he gets taken down, he works his way back up and beats Gerald Mearshart up with combinations and kind of peppers him until he's able to put that steak in the oven and get the finish. So give me Brian Bam Bam Barberina to defeat Gerald GM3 Mearshart via a late second round TKO. Up next is a fight in the light heavyweight division between a former light heavyweight title challenger in Ovint St. Peru, or OSP, taking on Kennedy and Chukwu. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I don't know why Ovint St. Peru is still fighting. I don't know how the UFC even sanctions this guy to still compete. I mean, he's gotten some good wins throughout his UFC career, but at this point, the guy cannot take a punch. He's not durable. He doesn't really resort to his grappling, which gave him some success early in his career. And, the minute you touch his chin, he does the chicken dance. When Conor McGregor said, Augusta wind, and he does the chicken dance, that's Ovince St. Preux. Now, Kennedy Nzechukwu isn't the most durable guy, but he has so much more durability than OSP. Aside from a Hail Mary head kick, aside from a Hail Mary straight left, I really think OSP is just a walking punching bag at this point in his career, and Nzechukwu is dangerous on the feet with boxing combinations, knees to the body, and decent kicking game, and also has a really solid game from the front headlock series when it comes to his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He'll look to set up guillotines, look to set up rear naked chokes. I think he stuns Ovince St. Preux within the first 2 minutes of the fight, rocks him, jumps on his neck, and gets a submission. I'm going Kennedy Nzechukwu via first round guillotine choke submission or a first round ninja choke submission. Yeah, I'll go ninja choke. First round ninja choke submission. I don't have any faith in OSP. I don't know how anybody could, and I'm honestly surprised the UFC still lets him compete with the amount of damage he's taken in recent memory in terms of his MMA career inside of the UFC. So no faith in OSP, all the confidence in Kennedy Nzechukwu, but at a minus 500, you just play the finish or you play Nzechukwu in round 1 and 2. So give me Kennedy Nzechukwu via first round ninja choke submission after he stuns him on the feet with a big shot. And yeah, let's move on to the next one. All right, up next, we've got a battle in the welterweight division between Brian Pooh Bear Battle and Ange Loosa. Honestly, going into this spot before I watched the tape, I was heavily on the Brian Battle side. I picked him in his last fight. I picked against him in the fight before that. And I just feel like Brian Battle is a guy who I've doubted heavily in his UFC career. And it's not a guy I really want to doubt anymore. But then when I pick him, he tends to lose. So the only time I've really gotten picks right when it comes to Brian Battle was a submission win over AJ Fletcher. Now, coincidentally, Ange Loosa fought AJ Fletcher as well. And that was a back and forth war for 15 minutes. But the third round was where Loosa was able to kind of pitch a shutout, get takedowns, control Fletcher after stuffing Fletcher's takedowns, and kind of ground and pound his face into oblivion, landing like 92 strikes to like 6 on the side of AJ Fletcher. But the first round was close, but the early parts of the first round were heavily on the side of AJ Fletcher, just being the cleaner, more technical, just basically the prettier striker, throwing front kicks to the body, 1-2s down the middle, good counter hooks, good uppercuts, ripping the body, the front kick, the body kick. Ange Loosa was kind of just getting picked apart, kept at range, kept at a distance, even though AJ Fletcher has the shortest reach in the division. Then Loosa was able to come back towards the end of that round, get in his face, use his jab, keep him at a distance, throw the jab, throw the body kick, throw the 1-2s, and just find a home for his right hand over and over and over again. Whether it was a 1-2, whether it was just a straight right hand. Loosa is a very powerful striker, but he's not just all power. There is some brains behind the brawn. He uses good technical movement, good lateral movement, good in and out movement, good switch kicks to the body, punctuates his punches with kicks, has a very solid, clean, technical right hand, good jab, 1-2s down the middle, and can put his combinations together. I think this fight is very close, but I do think that the reach is going to be the biggest advantage for Brian Battle. He has a 3-inch reach advantage, but I think he's going to use his reach a little bit better than Ange Loosa. I think if Ange Loosa wants to win this fight, he has to kind of take the Gabe Green approach without getting knocked out early in the fight, and try to make it a dirty, nasty, drawn-out brawl. Now, he can stay technical in the brawl as well, but he kind of has to get in the face of Brian Battle and make this dirty, make it nasty. The one time we saw Battle get dominated was when he got dropped and out-wrestled by Renat Fakhretdinov, and not only was the striking more powerful, but he was able to get on the inside, take him down, control. Ange Loosa is going to be the better wrestler here, but I think the better jiu-jitsu, the better submission artist is going to be Brian Battle, but the power in the wrestling, the takedowns and everything like that, I think this fight's going to be close until it's not. And it's really going to come down to who do you give the cardio advantage to. I think Loosa can hurt Brian Battle, but I think Battle can hurt Loosa with front kicks to the body, head kicks, low kicks, and kind of just working that front kick. Very similar to how he beat AJ Fletcher, use his reach, use his length, keep him at a distance, but even AJ Fletcher was able to get on the inside against Bryan Battle. He was also able to do it against Ons Lusa, almost got him out of there in the second round, hurt him, wobbled him, but we've seen that even when Lusa gets hurt, he is a very durable guy. But I am going to pick Bryan Battle to win because I think there is going to be a big advantage in terms of activity on the ground when it comes to the submissions. I think he will threaten with submissions later in the fight, and I think he is going to be not the more powerful striker, not the higher volume striker, but I think he's just going to land shots in between the combinations of Lusa. But originally going in, I was very confident in Bryan Battle, but the more I watch tape on this fight, I think there is a world where Ons Lusa either clips Bryan Battle and hurts him, because we've seen Battle get dropped in the Tresean Gore fight, we saw him get dropped in the Fakhretdinov fight, and we even saw him get hurt and wobbled in the fight against AJ Fletcher. So although he's been able to survive the knockdowns and survive the power, he has been hurt, and I think Lusa is a guy who can get on the inside and hurt a guy like Battle, and he's not just a brawn, muscly type of fighter. He does have technical ability, he does have technical skill, but I think Bryan Battle's going to be able to pull it out down the stretch. I think he's going to be able to win those rounds the longer the fight goes, and I think Bryan Battle wins this fight via a 29-28 unanimous decision, but there is a world where I could see Ons Lusa winning this fight. Like I said, before I watched tape, I was a lot more confident in Bryan Battle, but after watching tape, man, I think this is a very tricky fight because Lusa's technical, Lusa has a lot of power, he has much more power than Bryan Battle, and he has good offensive wrestling that I think has been a problem for Bryan Battle unless he's the one initiating the takedowns. So I'm going to go Bryan Battle, but I'm going to go like 60-40. I'm not super duper confident in it, but I do think that at range and at distance, those front kicks and the long punches of Bryan Battle are going to give Lusa some trouble. But if there is a knockout in this fight, I think it comes from the side of Lusa. But give me Bryan Pooh Bear Battle to win via 29-28 unanimous decision. All right, and now we're at the main event of the evening in the UFC's heavyweight division between Tai Bam Bam Tuivasa taking on Marcin Tybura. This is a very tricky matchup because I do think the better fighter overall is Marcin Tybura, and I think the fighter with the better cardio is Tybura. But we do know that even though Tuivasa has a little bit softer of a body and looks like he's way more out of shape than, he actually is, he can push a high pace. He can push, heavy volume, put things together. And the fight with him and Ciryl Gane was a back and forth brawl where I know Tuivasa got dropped much more, but he also caught Ciryl Gane and dropped him and hurt him at multiple points. The power advantage is clearly on the side of Tuivasa, but the overall MMA game is on the side of Marcin Tybura with the takedowns, with the grappling, with the head kicks, the body kicks, the low kicks. He puts his combinations together well and punctuates his combinations with kicks is what I was trying to say. But the early rounds is where I think Tuivasa, if he doesn't respect Tybura too much and crashes that pocket and gets on the inside, he can land a big overhand right. He can land a big left hook. He can land a big uppercut, and he can hurt Tybura. Tybura is a guy that we've seen get hurt. We've seen get dropped. We've seen get finished with strikes before. But at the same time, I think Tuivasa is kind of outgunned here. It's early for Tuivasa, like a round 1, round 2 KO, but I'm not going to pick him because I just don't think he's invested in the UFC anymore. I don't think he's invested in his MMA game. And once he gets hurt, once he gets, kind of pieced up and kept at a distance and he can't land his big power, I'm not saying he quits, but he kind of starts to shell up and give the opponent more openings and a higher advantage to just kind of outpoint him or just pour it on to get a finish. He got dominated by Volkov. Tybura lost to Volkov as well, but I believe he lost via decision. Tuivasa just got finished and taken out. I think Tybura is more technical. I think Tybura has the cardio advantage. I think Tybura has the grappling advantage. And I think, like I said, he's just the more well-rounded fighter. And although Tuivasa, it doesn't really matter when it comes to analytics, it doesn't really matter when it comes to statistics or stylistics, because he has that touch of death in his power with the hooks, the uppercuts, the overhand right, the 1-2 down the middle, good elbows in the clinch, really solid low kicks. I think the grappling is going to be the biggest advantage for Tybura here, and I think even at range, he can, fake his hands, land a big head kick with the lead leg, hurt him to the body with front kicks, but I think the wrestling is going to be the biggest advantage here, and I am going to take Marcin Tybura to get the job done via ground and pound TKO. I think he will use his wrestling. I think at a distance, he uses those front kicks, he uses head kicks, he chops the legs, and then when Tuivasa tries to close the distance and crash the pocket, he feints, changes levels, and gets the takedowns, and really just starts to ground and pound from the top until either Tuivasa gets grounded and pounded in like round 2 or round 3, or gives up his neck to get caught in a submission. So I'm going to take Marcin Tybura via second round ground and pound TKO. But again, there is a world where Tuivasa just clips him early, lands a big uppercut, lands a big overhand. And like I said, even though he hasn't shown to be the most durable guy, Tuivasa's not a guy who's going to quit on himself, but I feel like he's kind of gone into his defensive shell a little bit more because of how much he's been hurt and wobbled in recent fights in his career. So I'm going to take Marcin Tybura, second round ground and pound TKO for the UFC Vegas 88 main event. But this is not a fight I would bet. I don't like betting heavyweight MMA as it is, but give me Tybura, second round TKO via ground and pound.